Why did she look so calm behind a weapon that broke men's bones? The morning sun stretched over the sniper range, spilling long shadows across the concrete as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez made his inspection. 23 years in uniform had hardened his senses. He noticed everything: footsteps where they shouldn't be, the hesitation of a rookie, the scent of oil on steel. But that morning, something stopped him in his tracks. A lone figure lay prone behind the Barrett M82A1, the beast, 30 pounds of metal and recoil that could bruise shoulders and fracture jaws. Most shooters flinched before the first shot left the barrel. Yet this soldier, the name tape read Thompson, looked almost delicate against it. Her frame slight, her long auburn hair bound into a tight regulation bun. She didn't look like someone wrestling a monster of a rifle. She looked like she belonged there, as if the weapon had been built for her hands. Rodriguez slowed his steps, boots whispering against the concrete. Through his binoculars, he studied the target. It wasn't just far, it was absurdly far. A setup no one on his base would have dared to try. His men tested themselves at range, sure, but this distance was something else. Something closer to a stunt than training. Most soldiers would have waited for calmer air. The wind was gusting in unpredictable bursts, curling over the valley floor like invisible rivers. But Thompson didn't flinch. She shifted her body slightly, exhaled in slow control, and laid her finger across the trigger as if the rifle weighed nothing at all. The shot cracked through the stillness, a thunderclap that rattled glass in the tower windows. The muzzle flash licked at the morning air. Any other soldier would have rolled with the recoil, fighting to regain balance. But Thompson barely moved. Through his lenses, Rodriguez tracked the bullet as if instinct alone could follow it across the impossible stretch of land. Seconds later, the target, a metal plate glinting faintly in the distance, quivered under a perfect impact. Bullseye! Rodriguez lowered his binoculars slowly. He'd seen master marksmen before, had trained them, tested them, even buried a few. But what he just witnessed wasn't routine. It wasn't even extraordinary. It was unsettling. And yet Thompson didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't even glance toward the target to confirm the hit. Instead, she began breaking down the Barrett with clinical precision. Bolt out, chamber cleared, scope packed away. Her face didn't betray satisfaction or pride, only the cool, detached rhythm of repetition. Rodriguez approached. He was close enough now to see the lines of her face, young, early 30s at most. Intense green eyes that flickered up at him only for a second before returning to her task. She finished packing the rifle, then rose with the heavy case slung over one shoulder as though it were a backpack. "That was quite a shot, soldier," Rodriguez said, voice carrying the gravel of decades in command. She met his gaze briefly. No smile, just a small nod, measured, polite but guarded. Then silence. She didn't offer explanation, didn't boast, didn't seek approval. She simply walked past him, boots steady, leaving the echo of the shot hanging heavier than the sound itself. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. He knew soldiers. He knew cocky ones who bragged about a clean hit at half that distance. He knew broken ones who flinched at shadows after a tour too long. But this woman, she didn't fit, and something told him she wasn't here to. That night the silence of his office felt different. He sifted through the day's reports, but Thompson's entry made him pause. Routine marksmanship evaluation. His lips curled into a thin smile. Nothing about what he'd seen was routine. He leaned back in his chair, the years of instinct gnawing at him. A shooter-like that didn't come out of nowhere. So he dug. Hours later, green glow from his monitor lit the tired lines of his face. Personnel files, deployment records, training logs, he combed through them all. Thompson's file was thin, too thin. Basic training, advanced marksmanship courses, Afghanistan deployments, but redactions covered page after page. Gaps, missing months, classified notes. Something in those absences screamed louder than the words left behind. The breakthrough came the next morning after a coded call to an old friend, Colonel James Mitchell, SOCOM headquarters. They'd shared blood and sand in Iraq. Mitchell was steady, unflappable. But when Rodriguez spoke Thompson's name, the silence on the other end stretched longer than comfort allowed. "Marcus, where exactly did you encounter this soldier?" Mitchell's voice was low, careful. Rodriguez told him. Described the Barrett, the distance, the perfect shot. He heard keys clattering on the other end, rapid, sharp. Then a pause. Then Mitchell's tone shifted, dropping into something almost reverent, almost fearful. "She isn't just any sniper," Mitchell said finally. "What you saw on that range, that's her baseline. Routine. Marcus, this woman has done things our computers told us were impossible." Rodriguez sat up straighter. He could feel the cooling weight of his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. Mitchell told him about the kill. 3,247 meters, mountains, variable winds, a target commanding fire on a pinned-down team. Traditional support couldn't reach them. Extraction was failing. 7 lives were minutes away from ending. And Thompson had been 2 miles out, alone. She studied the terrain for 6 hours, calculated not just the wind, not just the gravity, but the Earth's rotation beneath the bullet. She pulled the trigger, and the impossible became flesh. The enemy commander fell, and American soldiers walked away from a valley that should have been their grave. Rodriguez swallowed hard. He didn't respond, didn't trust his own voice. "And Marcus," Mitchell added quietly, "that shot is classified, deep classified. Officially, it never happened. Her name won't be in any records you can access. That's why you didn't know her." Rodriguez's office suddenly felt too small, the air too still. The weight of what he'd learned pressed against his chest. When he hung up, he sat alone for a long time, staring at the quiet range outside his window. The woman he'd seen handle the Barrett like a violin wasn't just another soldier passing through. She was possibly the deadliest sniper in American history. And yet when he thought of her face, he didn't see pride, didn't see arrogance. He saw distance, guarded silence, a woman who carried storms inside and spoke none of them aloud. He realized something then, something that unsettled him more than the shot itself. For soldiers like Thompson, silence wasn't avoidance, it was survival. And if she was back stateside, training quietly, it meant she was at a crossroads. What came next, he couldn't yet guess. Why did she keep coming back to the range, always alone, always silent? For 3 mornings straight, Chief Marcus Rodriguez found her there before sunrise. Staff Sergeant Sarah Thompson, prone behind the Barrett as if the rifle were an extension of her body. No fanfare, no chatter, just quiet breathing and the echo of impossible shots that left even hardened Marines shaking their heads. Others noticed too. They gave her space, not out of disrespect, but instinctively, like stepping back from a storm you couldn't see but knew was brewing. Soldiers talk, rumors spread, yet no one dared interrupt her rhythm. There was something about her presence that created distance, a silent authority words couldn't match. Rodriguez lingered in the shadows of the observation tower. He told himself it was duty, that it was his job to evaluate every soldier under his command. But truthfully, he was fascinated. Day after day, she disassembled and reassembled the Barrett with a serenity that bordered on ritual. Her movements carried the weight of endless repetition, but also something else, something quieter, a need maybe, a way to silence whatever echoed in her head when the rifle wasn't in her hands. On the 3rd morning, he approached. "Need anything for your training?" His tone was casual, stripped of the authority that usually rode his voice. Thompson looked up. For the first time, her green eyes lingered on him longer than a heartbeat. "The wind here," her voice was low, carrying a faint southern drawl. "It wanders. Back in the mountains, you could read the air. Valleys told you how it would move. Here, it's different." It was the most she had said to anyone since arriving. Rodriguez didn't press. He just nodded, but inside something clicked. That wasn't the language of a soldier parroting doctrine. That was the language of someone who had lived with the wind, studied it, survived by it. Over the following week, their conversations remained brief but steady. Small cracks in her guarded silence. She spoke of Montana, growing up on a ranch, the daughter of a veterinarian and a math teacher. Her father had put a .22 rifle in her hands when she was 8, teaching her to protect the garden from rabbits. By high school, she was winning competitions across the state. "My mother wanted me to study engineering," she said one morning, her voice drifting between careful words as she polished the barrel. "I had the grades, full scholarships, MIT." She said it like it was just another fact, not the fork in the road that had changed her life. Rodriguez didn't comment. He didn't need to. He could see the weight of that choice in her eyes. She never mentioned Afghanistan, never spoke of the classified years Mitchell had whispered about. But the silence between her words spoke volumes. The way her jaw tightened at sudden noises. The way she cleaned her rifle long after it was spotless. The way she sometimes stared through the scope at an empty field, as if ghosts lived out there in the distance. Patience, Rodriguez realized, wasn't just her skill on the trigger. It was her way of being, waiting, enduring, carrying what others couldn't see. Then came the day the Marines arrived. A group of young snipers, loud and confident, boasting about their training as they strode across the range. Their leader, Staff Sergeant Davis, carried himself with swagger, the kind born from skill, yes, but also from ignorance of how deep the ocean really runs. Rodriguez watched it unfold, the sideways glances, the dismissive smirks, and finally the comments loud enough for Thompson to hear. "No way an Army shooter keeps up with Marines out here, especially not a woman." The words hung heavy in the air. Rodriguez saw Thompson's jaw tighten, but she didn't respond, didn't even look up from her rifle. Davis laughed, egged on by his men. "Bet she can't even handle that Barrett without a spotter." Rodriguez braced for a reaction, but Thompson only exhaled slowly, her movements calm, precise. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't broken. She was waiting. Minutes later, she approached Rodriguez quietly. "Chief, would it be possible to set up a friendly competition?" Her voice was even, polite, but beneath it was something sharper, purpose. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. The contest began with the Marines shooting first. At standard ranges, they performed well-tight groups, steady form, confidence in their shots. Rodriguez noted their skill. They were no amateurs. Then Thompson stepped forward. She requested the Barrett. Davis snickered, muttering about recoil. But his smirk faltered when she requested targets beyond their reach, 1,800 meters. Then 2,100. Rodriguez saw it in her posture, the same intensity he had glimpsed that first morning. The quiet calm of a predator who knows patience is deadlier than teeth. Her first shot shattered the silence. Dead center at 1,800 meters, the Marines grew quiet. Her second shot followed, equally precise at 2,100. And then she asked for 2,500, a range that pushed the Barrett beyond its design. The air grew still. Even Davis fell silent. Thompson took nearly 10 minutes preparing, studying, calculating, every adjustment exact, every breath measured. When she finally pulled the trigger, time itself seemed to pause. The round struck within inches of the bull's, impossible, and yet undeniable. Silence. Then Davis stepped forward, humbled, apology etched in his face. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that. I was out of line." Thompson shook his hand with no malice, expression steady, professional. The storm had passed and she hadn't raised her voice once. After the Marines departed, Rodriguez asked her the question that had lingered in his chest. "Why didn't you just ignore them?" She stood in the fading sunlight, eyes scanning the empty range. For a long moment she said nothing, then softly, "Because there were young women watching. If I let it slide, I'd be telling them that kind of talk is acceptable. Sometimes you stand up not for yourself, but for the ones who come after you." Rodriguez felt the weight of her words settle deep. She wasn't just a sniper, She wasn't just a record breaker, she was a symbol, and she knew it. That night, as he walked the quiet halls of the facility, Rodriguez realized something he hadn't seen before. Her strength wasn't the shot, it wasn't the skill. It was the silence she carried, the discipline that turned storms into lessons. And for the first time, he wondered, what price had she paid for it? What happens when the army itself comes to watch you? By the end of that week, whispers about Thompson had already spread beyond the range. Soldiers who had seen her shots spoke in low tones. Marines who had mocked her now carried quiet respect. Even the skeptical instructors nodded, conceding something they couldn't explain. But it wasn't just gossip that traveled. Word moves fast through the veins of the military. And soon, men and women in pressed uniforms, brass on their collars, began arriving at the facility under the guise of inspections. Rodriguez had been in long enough to recognize the truth. They weren't there for him. They were there for her. Thompson endured it with the same composure she carried everywhere. Silent, steady. She didn't play to the audience. She didn't grandstand. She trained as if no one was watching, even when every eye was fixed on her. But then came the day General Patricia Hayes stepped onto the range. The air shifted. This wasn't some curious colonel or cautious observer. Hayes was one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Army, her reputation sharp, her gaze sharper. She didn't waste time. After brief formalities, she asked to speak to Thompson in private. Rodriguez gave them space, but when Thompson emerged from the meeting an hour later, something had changed. Her shoulders carried weight that wasn't there before. That evening, she found Rodriguez in his office. She didn't ask permission before stepping inside, just settled into the chair across from his desk, the Barrett case leaning against her leg like a silent companion. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. "Chief," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "they want me back." Rodriguez didn't answer immediately. He just leaned back, waiting. "They're building new systems," she continued. "Integrated optics, ballistic computers, sensors that read conditions in real time. They want someone who can test the limits, someone who can prove what's possible." Her eyes flicked down, then back up. "They want me to be that person." Rodriguez studied her face. For all her calm, there was a fracture there, a flicker of doubt she couldn't hide. "Do you want it?" he asked simply. Thompson's jaw tightened. "That's the problem." She fell silent, staring past him at the faded photos on his wall. Old units, men long gone, frozen smiles from wars no one talked about anymore. Finally she spoke. "4 years, that's how long I was in it. Classified theaters, Overwatch, missions no one will ever read about. Every decision I made, life or death. And every shot I fired meant someone never went home again." Her voice caught almost imperceptibly. "I know those actions saved American lives. I know the math, but knowing doesn't mean carrying it gets easier." Rodriguez's chest tightened. He knew that weight. Different battles, same burden. The truth every veteran carried, the cost of survival wasn't counted in medals. It was carried in silence. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, fingers laced tight. "When I was out there, patience kept me alive. Precision kept others alive. But you spend enough time with nothing but the wind and a trigger and you start to lose pieces of yourself, pieces you don't get back." The room fell quiet. Only the hum of the old fluorescent light above them filled the air. Rodriguez finally said, "Hayes didn't come here just to watch you shoot. She came with an offer." Thompson nodded once. "They want you in deeper," he said. "New projects, more secrets, more weight." "Yes. And you're not sure if you can carry it anymore." Her eyes lifted to his, steady but vulnerable. "That's the truth of it." Rodriguez felt the years of command pressing against him, urging him to say something certain, something guiding. But he had nothing easy to give. He remembered Iraq, remembered watching young men turn into old souls overnight, their eyes never the same again. He remembered his own hands shaking when he thought no one was looking. "You don't have to answer now," he said finally. "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't saying yes or no, it's admitting you don't know yet." She nodded slowly, the faintest breath of relief crossing her features. In the days that followed, Thompson returned to the range. But Rodriguez noticed something different in her rhythm. She still trained with intensity, still calculated every breath, every adjustment. But there were moments, small pauses, fleeting hesitations, when she seemed somewhere else. One morning, while cleaning the Barrett, she spoke softly. "The record shot everyone whispers about, that wasn't my hardest, not even close." Rodriguez looked at her, waiting. "It was 800 meters," she said. "In the rain, target moving. My men pinned down, wounded. They needed me to make that shot or they weren't walking out. Distance didn't matter, pressure did." She described it without embellishment, scaling a cliff in a storm, anchoring herself with climbing gear, hanging by a rope as bullets tore the air around her, timing her trigger pull with the reload of a machine gunner who was cutting down her patrol. 1 second of window, one chance. "I made the shot," she said simply. "But that's the one that stayed with me, because it wasn't about records. It was about whether they lived or died." Her hands stilled on the rifle, eyes distant. That's what people never understand. They talk about distance, precision, records. They don't see the faces, the weight, the ones you saved and the ones you didn't. Rodriguez didn't interrupt. He just listened. Sometimes silence was the only respect you could give. By sunset, she was gone from the range, leaving behind only the faint scent of gun oil. But her words lingered with him. That night, alone in his quarters, he understood something new. Her struggle wasn't about whether she could still make the shot. It was about whether she wanted to keep being the person who had to. What happens when the ghosts you tried to leave behind come knocking at your door? The call came without warning. Rodriguez was mid-briefing when his secure phone vibrated against the desk. The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent. "A federal building downtown. Armed suspect on the roof. 3 hostages. Wounded officers already. The FBI wanted military liaison support." And they wanted her. By the time Rodriguez reached the staging area, the scene was chaos. Police cruisers blocked intersections, lights flashing. Federal agents clustered around a command truck, radios alive with overlapping chatter. Above it all, the building loomed, its rooftop barricaded with sandbags and improvised cover. The suspect wasn't just armed, he was trained. His positioning showed it, clear fields of fire on every approach, overlapping angles, no blind spots. Whoever he was, he had studied this. And he had leverage, 3 terrified hostages. Rodriguez stepped into the command post and immediately saw her. Thompson, calm amid the storm, binoculars in hand, eyes fixed on the rooftop like nothing else existed. The FBI commander, a sharp-jawed man with sweat streaking his collar, gestured helplessly at a map. "We can't get close. Our snipers are maxed out at 800. The nearest building with a line of sight is over 1,400. We can't risk it. We're out of options." Rodriguez looked at Thompson. She lowered the binoculars, turned, and spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had already solved the equation. "I can make that shot." The room stilled, conversations halted, heads turned. The commander blinked. 1,400 meters in an urban environment, through glass, crosswinds between buildings. "That's possible," she said, "with the right equipment and the right angle." Her tone carried no bravado, just fact. Within minutes, her Barrett was on the way, special optics and match-grade ammunition loaded into a convoy. Rodriguez accompanied her to the rooftop she had chosen, a vantage point high, narrow, with barely enough space to prone out. But it offered what no one else had found, a sliver of angle to the suspect's chest. She spent nearly an hour preparing, not rushing, not flinching under the weight of radios crackling, negotiators pleading, and the knowledge that 3 lives dangled on her trigger pull. She charted wind currents bouncing between towers, measured angles, adjusted for the humidity rising from sun-warmed concrete. Rodriguez stood a few paces behind, watching the transformation. The guarded woman he had known on the range dissolved. In her place was the operator Mitchell had warned him about, the one who read air like a map, who bent physics to her will. Through her scope she saw him clearly, the suspect, young, mid-20s maybe, his stance confident but restless, military training in his posture, yes, but not the discipline of experience. He paced, barked demands, gestured wildly at his captives. Every so often his rifle swept dangerously close to them. Her jaw tightened, she steadied her breathing. And then he moved, shifted into a position that left his center mass briefly exposed. 3 seconds, maybe less. Rodriguez held his breath without realizing. The Barrett thundered. The round cut the distance in under 2 seconds, struck true. The suspect collapsed instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the rooftop. Chaos erupted, agents shouting, radios exploding with orders. But on the rooftop, silence reigned. Thompson slowly lifted her cheek from the stock, exhaled, and closed her eyes for a moment. The hostages lived. The threat was ended, and one impossible shot had done what dozens of armed men couldn't. Back at the command post, the air buzzed with relief, awe, and adrenaline. Officers shook hands, clapped backs, exchanged half-laughs born of near disaster. The FBI commander approached her, gratitude spilling from his words. "You just saved 3 lives, Sergeant. Hell, you saved this whole operation." She nodded politely but said nothing more. No acceptance of praise, no pride, just silence. Later, as Rodriguez drove her back to base, the city lights washed over her face. She sat in the passenger seat, quiet, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Finally, she spoke. "That's the first time in years my shot meant someone went home to their family." Her words hung heavy, soft but sharp as glass. Rodriguez glanced at her. "That's why you learned to shoot, isn't it?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with a faint breath, "It was never about records, never about war. It was about protecting what others couldn't. Somewhere along the way I lost that. Today reminded me." Rodriguez felt something shift in her tone. Not resolution, not yet, but clarity, a thread she could finally hold on to. The following morning, whispers already circled the base. Reporters wanted interviews. Agencies wanted contracts. Politicians wanted a symbol, but Thompson shut them all out, declined every request. She walked to the range as she always had, silent, steady, carrying her Barrett like a private burden. Rodriguez saw it, though, the faintest change in her step, a weight lifted if only slightly. Because sometimes it wasn't the record shots that defined you. Sometimes it was the ones that reminded you why you pulled the trigger in the first place. Why do victories sometimes feel heavier than defeats? The morning after the hostage rescue, Rodriguez found his base buzzing like a hornet's nest. Soldiers clustered in corners, talking in low, charged voices. Phones rang with unusual urgency. Even the senior officers who normally carried themselves with detached calm now spoke in clipped tones. Everyone knew. The details hadn't been released publicly, of course. The FBI would never mention her by name. But in the sealed corridors of the military world, word had spread. A female sniper had ended a crisis with a single shot no one else could take. And suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of her. By noon, Rodriguez's office was stacked with requests. Units wanted to observe her training. Law enforcement agencies wanted her as a consultant. Defense contractors wanted her opinion on prototype optics. Even politicians, never slow to sniff out a symbol, were asking about her availability for public recognition. Rodriguez shook his head, sifting through the paperwork. It was always the same. A soldier saves lives and the world sees an opportunity. But Thompson wasn't a woman who sought opportunities. She sought silence. He found her, as always, on the range. The Barrett rested across her knees, her hands moving over it with steady patience. She didn't look up when he approached. "You know the world's trying to put you on a stage," he said. "I know. You're ignoring them." A faint breath of amusement crossed her lips. Ignoring is easier when you've been trained to vanish. Rodriguez studied her face. She looked the same, calm, detached, but he knew better. Inside, she was calculating, weighing something far heavier than public attention. That evening, his suspicion proved right. General Hayes returned. The meeting wasn't long, but its weight lingered. Hayes didn't waste words. She congratulated Thompson, of course, but quickly pivoted. The operation had proven what the general already knew. Thompson's skill wasn't just rare, it was transformative. "We're not just talking about rifles anymore," Hayes said. "We're building the future. Integrated systems, ballistics married to AI, environmental sensors feeding real-time solutions. We need someone who doesn't just shoot but understands the theory behind every shot. That's you." Thompson listened quietly. Hayes's words were polished, persuasive. Service, innovation shaping the next generation of warfare. The offer was clear: go deeper, more classified, more sacrifice. A life lived in shadows, her name absent from every record but whispered in the rooms where wars were planned. Hayes finished, her voice softening. "You've already proven what one person can do. Now imagine what you could build for the future." When she left the room, Thompson didn't speak. Not right away. She simply walked past Rodriguez, out into the cool night, Barrett case in hand. Rodriguez followed her as far as the range, where she finally stopped. "Chief," she said quietly, "do you ever feel like the more you give, the less of yourself is left?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He had no easy answer. She lowered the rifle case, leaned against the concrete wall. "I thought saving those hostages would give me clarity, that maybe I'd remember why I chose this path, but all it did was remind me of the line I've been walking. Every time I pull that trigger, I save someone, and I end someone. Both truths live in the same shot." Her voice thinned, like it was being pulled through a narrow crack. "And now Hayes wants me to go further, to spend years designing systems that push those decisions even farther away from human hands. What happens when I'm not the one calculating anymore? When the computer is, and the blood is still on me because I helped build it?" Rodriguez said nothing. He could see her shoulders tightening, her eyes flickering with something she usually buried deep. For the first time, she wasn't the calm, unflappable sniper. She was a woman caught between two worlds, neither of which promised peace. Over the next days, the pressure only mounted. Senior officers came and went, shaking hands, offering compliments carefully designed to bind her tighter. Defense contractors slipped their way into inspections, casually dropping questions about ballistic coefficients and predictive optics. Even her fellow soldiers, many of whom once kept their distance, now watched her with open curiosity, as if her presence itself carried answers they craved. But Thompson's routine never changed. She arrived at the range at dawn. She trained in silence. She cleaned the Barrett until it gleamed. Yet Rodriguez noticed small shifts, longer pauses between shots, a tendency to stare at the empty horizon as though she were watching something play out only she could see. The silence around her was no longer just discipline. It was conflict. One morning, without preamble, she spoke as he approached. "Every shot I took overseas was classified, buried. The world will never know. And now this one, this hostage rescue, they're already trying to turn it into a headline, even though my name's not in print." Her hands tightened on the rifle. "Do you know what that feels like? To carry the responsibility but never the recognition, to hold the ghosts but never the story." Rodriguez let the question breathe. "Recognition fades," he said finally. "The ghosts don't. You already know which one matters." She gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "Yeah, that's the problem." That night, Rodriguez sat alone in his office long after lights out, staring at the silent range outside. He realized something unsettling. Thompson wasn't torn because she doubted her skill. She was torn because she doubted the cost. The Army saw her as an asset. Hayes saw her as a future. The media saw her as a symbol. But who saw her as a person? Why did every pair of eyes on base seem to follow her now? By the second week after the hostage rescue, Thompson's life had shifted into something she never wanted: spectacle. The range that once echoed only with rifle fire now buzzed with onlookers. Soldiers from other units lingered at the fences. Marines who'd once laughed under their breath now stood in silent respect. Even officers, men and women with careers older than she was, came under the guise of inspection, but kept their eyes fixed on her trigger finger. She ignored them, or tried to. Her hands never faltered, her breathing never broke rhythm, but Rodriguez could see the pressure mounting. The solitude she had once carved out here was gone. Every shot was an audience, every silence a performance. One morning he found her cleaning the Barrett with unusual intensity, cloth moving hard across steel. "They won't stop watching," she said flatly, without looking up. "You've given them something they don't understand," Rodriguez replied. "And people don't look away from what they don't understand." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't ask to be anyone's example." "No one ever does," he said softly. The breaking point came with the arrival of a new batch of recruits, young, green, their uniforms stiff, their eyes wide. They'd heard the rumors. They'd come to see if the myth was real. Rodriguez had arranged a training demo, routine in theory. But he saw it in their faces. This wasn't just another exercise. This was her. Thompson set up at the line as she always did. Barrett laid out before her, scope adjusted, body lowering into place with the ease of ritual. But when she looked up, her eyes locked on the recruits clustered at the edge of the range. Young women especially stared with something more than curiosity: hope, expectation. Rodriguez saw the flicker of hesitation in Thompson's posture. For a heartbeat, she wasn't the legend. She was just a woman being asked to carry the weight of strangers' dreams. She exhaled, then she began. Her first shot rang out, splitting the distance with perfect accuracy. A clean strike. The recruits gasped, some whispering to each other, eyes wide. Thompson said nothing. She simply reloaded, fired again. Another strike. Rodriguez watched her carefully. This wasn't the cold, detached calm of her classified years. Something was different. Her movements still carried precision, but also intent, as if each shot wasn't about proving herself but showing something larger. When she finally set the rifle aside, the recruits broke into scattered applause. It wasn't protocol, but it was honest. Thompson rose, dusted herself off, and started to walk away. But one voice stopped her. "Sergeant," a young woman, barely 20, stepped forward, nervous, clutching her helmet against her chest. "How do you deal with people telling you that you don't belong here?" The range went silent, every ear tilted toward her. Thompson's expression barely shifted, but Rodriguez knew this was the moment, when silence could no longer serve. She looked at the girl, then at the others. Their faces were open, waiting. Finally she spoke. Her voice was steady, low, carrying the weight of someone who had lived the answer. "You don't deal with it," she said. "You outlast it." A pause. Then she added, "Every insult, every doubt, every sideways look, they're trying to convince you to stop before you prove them wrong. Don't give them that victory. Don't waste your breath arguing. Just keep going. Make the shot. Let the silence do the talking." Her words settled over them like dust after a storm, quiet, heavy, unforgettable. The young woman nodded slowly, eyes bright, clutching her helmet tighter. Thompson didn't linger. She turned, shouldered the Barrett, and walked off the range. But Rodriguez saw it, the faintest crack in her armor, not weakness, not weariness, something gentler. That night, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, Rodriguez found her sitting alone on the hood of a Humvee, Barrett leaning against the bumper. She didn't look at him as he approached. "You didn't have to answer that girl," he said. "I know. But you did." Finally she looked at him, green eyes catching the last light of day. "Because if I don't, who will?" Rodriguez stood beside her, silent for a moment. Then, "That's what Hayes sees in you, not just the shooter, the symbol." Thompson shook her head faintly. "Symbols don't get to be people, Chief. They don't get to be tired or broken. They just stand there while everyone else looks at them." He heard the bitterness under her words, but also the truth. She wasn't afraid of being the best. She was afraid of being trapped by it. The next morning, she returned to the range as always. But when she fired, Rodriguez noticed something he hadn't seen before. She wasn't shooting for herself anymore. She was shooting for them. And that realization, he knew, would change everything. What do you do when the decision you've been avoiding arrives faster than you can prepare for it? It was late afternoon when the call came. Rodriguez was in his office, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound, when the red phone on his desk rang. The kind of line that only came alive for emergencies. "Chief Rodriguez," the voice on the other end said, "we've got a live situation. Civilian law enforcement needs immediate military support. They've requested your facility's assistance." He straightened in his chair. "What's the situation?" The details spilled out in clipped sentences. A barricade inside a suburban office complex, a heavily armed suspect with hostages, demands, police pinned down, SWAT unable to get close. The range was too great for their snipers, the layout too unpredictable. And then the final words. They specifically requested Staff Sergeant Thompson. By the time Rodriguez reached the staging site, the sun was dipping low, shadows stretching long across the city blocks. Tactical vehicles crowded the streets, agents moving with tense urgency. The FBI command post looked like organized chaos, maps taped to walls, radios crackling, screens flickering with drone feeds. Thompson stood in the corner, already studying schematics with her quiet intensity. She looked out of place amid the noise, still, focused, as if none of it reached her except what mattered. The FBI commander gestured them over. "Suspect's former military, knows tactics. He's fortified the top floor with hostages in sightlines. Any approach will cost lives. Distance is the problem. Our snipers can't do it, but she," his eyes flicked to Thompson, "she can." Rodriguez watched her carefully. This wasn't training. This wasn't controlled. This was the chaos she'd left behind. And yet she didn't flinch. "What's the distance?" she asked. "Over 1,400 meters, crosswinds, intermittent visibility through windows, moving hostages." She nodded once. "Get me elevation, a rooftop opposite, and bring the Barrett." Within the hour, she was prone on the gravel of a high-rise rooftop, scope aligned with the darkened windows across the street. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of asphalt and smoke. Below, the city moved unaware of how thin the line between safety and disaster had become. Rodriguez crouched behind her, silent. He could see the tension in the command post on the adjacent rooftop, negotiators on radios, agents packing, the weight of lives pressing down on all of them. Through her scope she saw the suspect, young, hard-eyed, his weapon trained casually on the hostages as he barked into a phone. He moved with the confidence of someone who thought he had time. Thompson studied him without blinking. Every movement, every shift, every flicker of light through the window, she was patient, endlessly patient. Minutes passed, then an hour. The negotiator's voice rose, fell. The suspect grew restless. His packing grew sharper, his gestures more aggressive. And then the window came. He stepped into the open, chest clear, weapon momentarily lowered. Rodriguez held his breath. The Barrett roared. Glass exploded. The suspect crumpled before his body even registered the sound. The hostages froze, then bolted into the arms of waiting agents. Radios erupted in relief. But on the rooftop there was no celebration, only silence. Thompson lifted her head slowly, eyes closing for a long, steady breath. Then she rose, breaking down the Barrett piece by piece, her face unreadable. Back at the command post, the FBI commander approached, gratitude spilling from him. "You saved lives today, Sergeant. That's twice now. You've done what none of us could." She nodded politely but offered no words, just as before. Later, in the quiet of the drive back, Rodriguez broke the silence. "That's twice now you've stepped into something you didn't have to. Twice you've saved lives with a shot no one else could make. Why?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, "Because it reminded me. This is why I learned to shoot. Not for records, not for war, for protection." Rodriguez said nothing, but he felt the shift. Something was crystallizing in her, sharp and undeniable. The next day, General Hayes returned once more. Her presence alone filled the briefing room with weight. She congratulated Thompson in clipped tones, but the real purpose was clear. "This proves it," Hayes said. "Your skills are beyond comparison. We need you in the program. You can shape the future of long-range warfare. You can build something that changes everything." Thompson listened quietly. When Hayes finished, she asked one question. "General, when I make those shots, the ones that save people, will your program let me do that? Or will it only be about building ways to kill from farther away?" The silence stretched. Hayes's jaw tightened. "The mission is national security. It's about deterrence, superiority." Thompson nodded slowly, as though that confirmed what she already knew. After Hayes left, she found Rodriguez on the range at dusk. The sky was streaked with violet, the air still warm. She set the Barrett down but didn't touch it. "I think I know my answer," she said. Rodriguez watched her, and she looked out across the empty fields, her voice steady, but tinged with something softer than he'd ever heard from her. "I'm done being a ghost in classified files. My shots can mean something different now. Not records, not deterrence, protection, training others, giving them the tools so fewer lives ever hang on a trigger pull." She glanced at him. "Hayes wants me in the shadows forever, but I've had enough shadows." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He felt a strange weight lift from his own chest. Because in that moment, he realized something. Thompson wasn't walking away from service. She was choosing a different kind of service, one the military couldn't fully understand. And for the first time since he'd met her, her silence didn't feel heavy. It felt free. What does it mean when the deadliest sniper in the room finally chooses peace? 3 months after the office complex rescue, the range felt different. The sun rose the same, the wind still wandered across the flatlands, and the Barrett still gleamed in the morning light. But Thompson was no longer training for herself. This was her last session before leaving the base. Rodriguez stood at a distance, watching as she moved through her ritual, scope checked, barrel inspected, bolt worked smooth. She lay prone, steady as ever, and loosed 3 shots in quiet rhythm. Each one struck home, perfect, as though the rifle itself were paying her farewell. When she finally rose, she lingered longer than usual. Hands resting on the Barrett's case, eyes scanning the horizon as if trying to memorize it. "You're ready," Rodriguez said softly. She turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't wide, not radiant, but genuine, rare, and perhaps more valuable for its scarcity. "I'm ready." Her next role had been finalized: federal law enforcement instructor and consultant. She would travel between agencies, training SWAT and FBI hostage rescue teams in precision shooting, sharing techniques honed in mountains and valleys the world would never hear about. She would consult on operations where a single mistake could cost innocent lives. She would compete in civilian precision competitions, not for glory, but for the discipline of it, the science she still loved. It wasn't escape, it was evolution. That evening they sat together in his office, the silence easy now, not heavy. She leaned back in her chair, Barrett case propped beside her, as Rodriguez leafed through a thin folder, her transfer orders. "You know," he said, "you once told me every shot you fired overseas meant someone didn't go home to their family." She nodded, green eyes steady. He closed the folder gently. "From now on, your shots will mean the opposite. Someone does go home." Her gaze softened, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw her shoulders relax, not in discipline, not in posture, but in release. When she left the base the next morning, Rodriguez watched her drive away, taillights shrinking against the endless road. He knew he might never see her again, but he also knew her story wasn't ending, it was changing. 6 months later, a letter arrived. His name typed neatly at the top, but the handwriting inside was hers, firm, clean, precise. "Chief, I wanted to let you know I've found my place. I've been training FBI teams working with SWAT. It's different than combat. The faces are younger, the questions endless, the mistakes sometimes frustrating. But when I see them learning, when I see them absorbing the discipline, it feels worth it. Every drill means fewer lives at risk down the line." Last week, an FBI unit resolved a hostage situation without firing a single shot. The negotiators held, the team moved, and no one died. I recognized the angles they used. I recognized the patience. They learned it here on my line. I don't need my name on their report. I just needed to know they walked away alive. "You once told me patience wasn't just a skill, it was survival. I think it's more than that. It's legacy. Because patience outlasts noise, outlasts arrogance, outlasts even fear. Thank you for giving me the space to find that again. S. Thompson." Rodriguez read the letter twice, then a third time. He tucked it into the top drawer of his desk, alongside a stack of faded photographs from another war, another time. The world would never know about her record shot. The 3,247 meters would remain buried in classified files. There would be no parades, no books, no headlines. But somewhere in FBI training yards and SWAT ranges, her words were being repeated. Her patience was being taught. Her silence was being passed down, not as absence but as discipline. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He thought of the first time he'd seen her, small against the weight of the Barrett, making an impossible shot and walking away without celebration. He thought of the recruits watching her, hungry for proof that they belonged. He thought of the hostages who went home because she refused to hesitate. And he realized something. Greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with medals or speeches. Sometimes it lives in the quiet choices, the decision to protect, the refusal to boast, the courage to walk away from shadows when they've taken too much. For Thompson, dignity had never been in words. It had always been in action. As he turned off the lamp that night, her letter safe in his drawer, Rodriguez knew her story would never be written in history books, but it would echo in every life saved by the men and women she trained. And maybe that was the truest record of all. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.